I am Julian, 32 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my family completely erased me from their holiday dinner, only to send me a $45,000 bill for my younger brother's wrecked Porsche the very next morning. While I was sitting entirely alone in my freezing apartment, staring at a leaked family group photo that deliberately excluded me, my father texted me a blunt demand. He said, "Pay this invoice before the end of the month. Do something useful for our family for once." They laughed and celebrated with their wealthy friends, clinking expensive champagne glasses and opening lavish presents, treating me like nothing more than a disposable ATM machine. But there was a massive secret they did not know. The tech company I had been quietly building from the ground up for years had just secured a massive corporate buyout. This deal made me a billionaire and the majority owner of the very real estate building my father's logistics firm leased for their headquarters. And now, they are begging on their knees outside my penthouse security gate, facing absolute bankruptcy and a massive lawsuit that will ruin them. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit like if you believe in justice against toxic families. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything. Now, let's go back to the exact moment my entire life changed. The message arrived right as the elevator doors were closing on my way up to my apartment. It was the night of Christmas Eve. The lobby of my building was unnervingly quiet, decorated with a modest, plastic pine tree that smelled faintly of artificial cinnamon and floor wax. I was exhausted from a brutal 80-hour work week. I pulled my phone from my heavy winter coat pocket, expecting a holiday greeting or perhaps a quick check-in from my mother. Instead, a single line of text from our family group thread burned bright against the dark screen of my phone. The message read, "Dinner starts at 7 p.m. sharp. Do not be late." Underneath that cold, demanding text was a high-resolution photograph. I stopped walking entirely. My boots felt like they were cemented to the floor of the elevator. I zoomed in on the image. It was a sprawling, beautiful mahogany dining table set with our family's fine china, crystal wine glasses, and a massive roasted turkey sitting perfectly in the center. Every single seat in that massive dining room was filled. My mother, Eleanor, was smiling radiantly at the head of the table, wearing a brand new pearl necklace. My father, Arthur, was standing at the opposite end, raising a glass of expensive red wine in a triumphant toast. My younger brother, Oliver, was laughing uproariously next to his new girlfriend. I recognized aunts, uncles, and even a few wealthy neighbors from their upscale gated community. Every single seat was filled with a smiling, joyous face. Except mine. There was not even an empty chair meant for me. There was no placeholder. I was simply erased. No one had told me they had moved the annual Christmas dinner to a different venue. No one had sent me the new address. They had simply gathered, celebrated, and documented the entire magical evening without a single thought about my existence. They did not forget me by accident. You do not forget your eldest son on Christmas Eve. They planned entirely around my absence. By the time I unlocked my apartment door and stepped into the pitch-black living room, the quietness of my home felt suffocating. I did not turn on the lights. I just stood by the kitchen island, letting the reality wash over me. And then, another notification chimed loudly in the dark. It was not a sudden realization of their mistake. It was not a panicked apology from a guilty mother. It was an invoice. The document attached to the email was an auto repair bill for exactly $45,000. It was specifically itemized for severe front-end collision repairs, custom paint matching, and structural frame alignment on a pristine white Porsche 911. Oliver's Porsche, the exact vehicle my father had foolishly bought him as a graduation gift to reward him for barely finishing a useless degree. There was no greeting attached to the email. There was no explanation of what had happened to the car. Just a blunt, demanding sentence from my father, Arthur. He wrote, "Handled this before the end of the month." I set my keys down on the cold marble counter. The silence of my apartment felt incredibly heavy, pressing against my eardrums. Outside, the harsh Denver snow was drifting lazily past my balcony window, painting the sleeping city in a cold, indifferent white. I stood there in the dark, my winter coat still fully zipped up, staring intensely at the glowing screen of my phone. They had actively hidden the location of the family holiday gathering from me. They had feasted and celebrated my absence. Yet, somehow, they still possessed the absolute audacity to expect me to open my wallet and pay for the damages to a luxury sports car I had never even been allowed to sit in. A quiet, pathetic part of me, the deeply ingrained, traumatized part that had spent 3 decades trying desperately to earn their basic affection, wanted to log into my bank account and just transfer the funds. I had the money. My salary from my software engineering firm was more than enough, though they had absolutely no idea about the true, staggering extent of my wealth. 4 years, I had been the family's silent financial fixer. I was the one who paid the property taxes when my father blew his small inheritance on a terrible investment scheme. I was the one who covered Oliver's massive credit card debt. I was expected to be responsible. I was expected to be blindly useful. Because in the Rowan family, if I was not paying for something, I simply did not exist. I walked over to the thick balcony glass and looked out over the sprawling city. The streetlights flickered below, casting long shadows across the snow. I felt a familiar, sickening ache in my chest. It was a tightness shaped exactly like all the years I had spent bending my entire identity around their selfish demands. But as I looked back down at that $45,000 invoice, something fundamental inside my brain shifted. It was a physical sensation, a cold, sharp clarity settling directly into my spine. I opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light across the dark kitchen. I pulled up the financial documents my father had hastily forwarded. I scrutinized the original loan agreement and the insurance denial letter attached to the bottom of the lengthy email chain. The Porsche was financed entirely under Oliver's name, with Arthur listed as the primary financial cosigner. My name was nowhere on these legal documents. Legally, financially, and morally, this disaster was not my burden to carry. I picked up my phone. I did not call my father to scream at him. I did not text my mother to cry and ask why I was not good enough to sit at her dinner table. Instead, I dialed the 24-hour customer service line for the luxury auto financing bank listed at the top of the loan document. A calm, automated voice guided me through the menu until a human operator finally answered the line. "Good evening, how can I assist you tonight?" the representative asked. I spoke evenly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and precise. "I need to report a vehicle for immediate repossession. The legal owners have defaulted on the repair liens, and the primary driver is entirely incapable of fulfilling the financial obligations." I provided the VIN number, the license plate, and the exact home address where I knew Oliver parked that ridiculous, mangled car. The operator paused, clearly surprised by the cold efficiency of the late-night call. She processed the information, verified the massive outstanding debt my father had been desperately hiding from the bank, and confirmed the repossession order. "The recovery team will be dispatched first thing in the morning," she stated firmly. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I set the device face down on the counter. The apartment remained perfectly still. There was no grand explosion, no dramatic music playing in the background. But in that quiet, dark kitchen, the desperate boy who wanted his family's approval finally died. And the man who was ready to completely dismantle their comfortable lives was born. The tow truck was coming. But the real storm was just gathering strength. To fully comprehend the absolute insanity of that $45,000 invoice, you have to understand the toxic foundation of the Rowan family dynamic. I grew up in a meticulously kept suburban house where silence carried significantly more weight than any spoken words, and where parental love was a highly restricted currency reserved strictly for one child. My father, Arthur, was a man who communicated almost exclusively in short, clipping commands. He was a mid-level executive at a regional logistics firm, a man utterly obsessed with the illusion of wealth rather than the actual accumulation of it. He cared deeply about what the neighbors whispered over the fences, about his perceived standing at the local HOA meetings, and about presenting the image of the perfect, flawless American family. Behind closed doors, he was rigid, unforgiving, and deeply insecure about his own mediocrity. My mother, Eleanor, was the silent architect of that family facade. She wore pastel cardigans, baked elaborate pies for neighborhood charity bake sales, and possessed a terrifying, quiet ability to manipulate reality with a soft, condescending smile. She never raised her voice in anger. She never threw plates. She simply adjusted the truth, twisting facts and shifting blame until it fit her preferred narrative. She smoothed over every aggressive edge my father created, but she never once stepped between us to protect me. And then there was Oliver, my younger brother by exactly 3 years. He was the undisputed golden child, the heir apparent to a family throne made entirely of maxed-out credit cards, false prestige, and deeply buried secrets. Even as a young kid, Oliver wore his entitlement easily, like a custom-tailored suit. He was naturally athletic, loud, and possessed the kind of reckless, carefree charm that made adults forgive him instantly for any transgression. I was the exact opposite. I was quiet, deeply analytical, and endlessly fascinated by the internal mechanics of computers and software systems. I distinctly remember a freezing winter afternoon when I was 14 years old. I had spent 3 grueling months mowing neighborhood lawns and shoveling heavy driveway snow just to buy spare parts. Eventually, I dragged an old, discarded computer tower from a local thrift store right into the center of our pristine kitchen. I excitedly spread the dusty motherboard, the tangled wires, and the tiny cooling fans across the dining table. I was building my very first operational server. I had no formal training. I had no idea what I was doing, but I felt a deep, profound sense of pride. I was creating something entirely my own from nothing but scrap. My father walked in from work, his heavy leather briefcase in hand. His winter coat was still on, dripping melted snow onto the hardwood floor. He did not ask what I was building. He did not look at the intricate wiring I had painstakingly tried to assemble. He simply glared down at the table, his face twisting into a mask of pure disgust. "Get this garbage off the table immediately," he demanded, his voice cutting through my excitement like a blade. "It is a complete waste of time. Look at you. You look like a scrap collector. Do something real with your life, Julian." Right behind him, 12-year-old Oliver slid effortlessly into a chair. He was holding up a brand new, incredibly expensive lacrosse stick my father had spontaneously bought him that very afternoon. My father's rigid, angry face instantly softened into a beaming, genuinely proud smile. "Now that," Arthur said, pointing directly at Oliver's new sports gear, "is a real investment. That takes talent." His voice never, ever sounded like that when he spoke to me. I quietly packed up my tools, my hands shaking slightly, and carried the heavy, rattling computer tower back to the freezing, uninsulated garage. I did not cry. I just absorbed the cruel lesson taking root in my chest. My passions were garbage. Oliver's hobbies were investments. That day, a quiet understanding lodged itself beneath my ribs. I was not the son he wanted to see succeed. I was just the spare part. That toxic pattern became the absolute blueprint of our lives. When it was time for college, my parents sat me down at that same kitchen table. They wore solemn expressions and explained that the economy was currently tough and money was tight. They told me I would need to take out massive student loans and work my way through a local state university. I accepted it without a fight. I worked grueling double shifts at a local Walmart, stocking heavy boxes on shelves until 2 in the morning, just to pay for my overpriced textbooks and a cramped, damp dorm room. I ate cheap instant noodles every night and wore secondhand winter coats that let the wind cut right through to my skin. However, 3 years later, when Oliver barely graduated high school with terrible grades, the financial narrative miraculously changed. Suddenly, a fully funded college fund materialized out of thin air. My parents happily paid for his exorbitant out-of-state tuition at a prestigious, private university. They even rented him a luxury off-campus apartment because he dramatically claimed the freshman dorms were too noisy and detrimental to his mental health. When I brought up this glaring disparity during a tense Thanksgiving dinner, calmly pointing out that I was currently drowning in $70,000 of crippling student loan debt while Oliver was driving a brand new sedan they had just bought him, the entire dining room went dead silent. My mother placed her silver fork down softly onto her porcelain plate. "Julian," she said, her voice dripping with deeply disappointed condescension. "Oliver simply needs a different kind of support. He is sensitive. You have always been so tough and independent. You do not need us the way he does. Why are you trying to ruin a beautiful Thanksgiving meal with your bitter jealousy?" I was instantly branded the villain just for noticing the blatant inequality. When I finally graduated and secured a high-paying junior developer salary at a respected firm, the family dynamic shifted again, but not in the way I desperately hoped. Suddenly, I was not just fiercely independent. I was a highly lucrative financial resource. My father started making offhand, guilt-tripping comments about how real family always helps each other. He strongly suggested I start aggressively contributing to his retirement accounts because he had sacrificed so much of his prime to put a roof over my head. Then came the ultimate betrayal of Aunt Clara. She was my mother's younger sister, following a notoriously messy divorce that left her completely broke. She was the only person in the extended family who occasionally called me just to ask how my life was going. I genuinely thought she cared about me as a human being. During my grandfather's deeply emotional funeral, I made the terrible mistake of pulling her aside and excitedly telling her about a major corporate promotion I had just received. I was so incredibly proud. I wanted anyone, to be proud of me too. Exactly 2 days later, my father called my cell phone. He did not congratulate me on the massive promotion. He did not say he was proud. Instead, he flatly told me the roof of their suburban house desperately needed replacing, and since I was rolling in extra cash now, it was my absolute duty as the eldest son to cover the $20,000 contractor fee. Aunt Clara had never been a trusted confidant. She was an active intelligence gatherer. She reported my exact salary increase directly back to my parents, so they knew precisely how much money they could systematically extract from me. And like a fool, I paid for the roof. I paid again when Oliver racked up a massive, humiliating credit card bill during his junior year of college. I paid because every single time I transferred the funds, my mother would smile at me, pat my arm, and call me her reliable, wonderful boy. I was quite literally trying to purchase their unconditional affection. But nothing was ever enough. Oliver eventually graduated with a completely useless degree and flatly refused to work entry-level jobs because he loudly declared they were beneath his massive potential. So, Arthur took out a crippling auto loan and bought him the white Porsche 911 to help him network with high-value individuals. It was the most ridiculous, financially suicidal justification for an egregious purchase I had ever heard. And now, years later, that very same Porsche was the direct catalyst for my complete awakening. The $45,000 repair bill sitting ominously in my inbox was not a polite request for assistance. It was a firm expectation. They naturally assumed I would simply absorb the massive financial impact of Oliver's recklessness, just exactly like I had quietly absorbed their emotional neglect for my entire life. I looked back at the leaked Christmas photo glowing on my laptop screen. My mother's radiant, fake smile. My father's proud, arrogant toast. Oliver's smug grin. They had feasted and celebrated my complete absence while I sat alone in a dark apartment, entirely discarded until the bill came due. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap. I walked into my expansive bedroom, opened a heavily secured, fireproof filing cabinet, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound financial portfolio. Inside those crisp pages were partnership agreements, corporate stock certificates, and highly lucrative real estate deeds. For the last 5 years, I had not just been a senior employee taking orders. My brilliant college roommate, Marcus, and I had co-founded an elite cybersecurity infrastructure firm. We had built it quietly, fiercely, and flawlessly. We had recently finalized a massive merger with a global tech conglomerate. My personal net worth had violently skyrocketed into the 9 figures literally overnight. Furthermore, through an aggressive, anonymous real estate trust, I had recently purchased several prime commercial properties directly in the downtown financial district. One of those massive properties was the sleek, 30-story glass tower, where Arthur's beloved logistics firm rented their entire corporate operations floor. I was quite literally my own father's landlord. I had hidden this immense wealth deliberately. I knew with absolute certainty that if my family found out about the massive success I had built, they would descend upon me like a plague of locusts. They would aggressively demand I buy them sprawling mansions, fund Oliver's lavish lifestyle indefinitely, and finance their pathetic delusions of grandeur. But staring intently at those heavy property deeds in the quiet of my bedroom, a brand new, terrifying strategy formed perfectly in my mind. I did not need to hide in the shadows anymore. I did not need to protect them from the reality of my success. I needed to weaponize it. The morning of December 26th broke crystal clear and bitterly cold over the Denver skyline. I woke up incredibly early, before the sun even crested the mountains. The sharp adrenaline from the previous night's decisions was still humming intensely in my veins. Before dealing with the inevitable explosive fallout of the car repossession, I needed cold, hard facts. I needed to know exactly why a brand new, top-of-the-line Porsche required $45,000 in severe front-end repairs, and more importantly, why the luxury insurance company had flatly refused to cover a single solitary cent of the damage. I brewed a strong, black cup of coffee and sat down at my cold kitchen island. I had hired an elite private investigator a few months prior to keep a close eye on a corporate competitor stealing our intellectual property. But today, I directed his incredible skills toward my own flesh and blood. Detective Miller was a man of terrifying efficiency. By 9 o'clock in the morning, he sent me a highly encrypted, secure file containing an official police report, a series of high-resolution photographs, and a leaked internal memo straight from the auto insurance claims adjuster. I opened the digital file. The raw truth hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Oliver had not just gotten into a minor fender bender in a grocery store parking lot. Exactly 4 nights ago, driving back from an incredibly expensive, high-end downtown nightclub, Oliver had completely lost control of the speeding Porsche and slammed it directly head-on into a thick concrete retaining wall outside a public city park. The high-definition photographs showed the pristine white front hood completely crumpled like cheap aluminum foil. The expensive, custom headlights were shattered into a million pieces across the dark asphalt. But it was not the violent crash that made my blood boil in my veins. It was the details buried in the police report. Oliver had been heavily, dangerously intoxicated behind the wheel. The official breathalyzer results recorded at the scene were nearly double the legal state limit. According to the arresting officer's sworn notes, my brother had belligerently screamed at the police, cursing at them and throwing his father's name around like it was an impenetrable shield. Arthur had rushed to the precinct in the middle of the night, hired an aggressive, high-priced defense lawyer, and managed to quietly suppress the absolute worst of the criminal charges to protect Oliver's spotless public record from a devastating felony conviction. However, the massive insurance conglomerate was not so easily bullied or bought. Because Oliver was undeniably driving under the influence of alcohol, which was a direct, irrefutable violation of his strict policy terms, the corporate adjusters completely denied the massive claim. They voided his expensive coverage entirely, leaving the massive financial burden entirely on the owners of the vehicle. Oliver was a reckless criminal who had severely endangered innocent lives, and Arthur had spent thousands of dollars on a slick lawyer to sweep the entire disaster firmly under the rug. And now, the very next morning, they wanted me to blindly foot the bill for the wreckage. They aggressively wanted me to pay $45,000 of my hard-earned money to fix a car that was violently destroyed in a drunk driving incident, completely shielding their precious golden boy from facing any actual, real-world consequences for his horrific actions. My jaw clenched so intensely tight that my teeth physically ached. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of their plan was suffocating. But the devastating betrayals were not over yet. While I was intently reading through the legal jargon of the insurance denial, my cell phone buzzed loudly against the marble counter. It was a direct text message from an unknown number. I hesitantly opened it. It was from Chloe, Oliver's current girlfriend. We had only met briefly a handful of times at awkward family gatherings, but she had always seemed incredibly nervous and on edge around the Rowan family dynamic. The desperate message read, "Julian, I know I absolutely should not be sending this to you. I could get in so much trouble. But I haven't been able to sleep for days. You desperately need to know what they actually said behind your back. I am so incredibly sorry for how they treat you. Attached directly to her text was a series of long screenshots. It was from a private family group chat titled, Rowan Holiday Planning. I immediately noticed my name was conspicuously absent from the member list. I had never even known this secondary chat existed. I scrolled to the very top of the bright screenshots, completely dated exactly 3 weeks before Christmas Eve. Arthur had written to the group, "Did anyone tell Julian about the major venue change for Christmas Eve dinner?" Aunt Clara, the ever-present meddler, quickly replied, "Not yet. Should I call him and give him the new address?" Then came the specific message that caused my heart to physically stop beating in my chest. It was from my mother, Eleanor, the woman who constantly preached about the sacred sanctity of family bonds and unconditional love. "Let's just deliberately leave him off the invite list this year," my own mother wrote. "Honestly, he always comes dressed in those cheap, plain clothes from department stores. He sits there the entire night with that miserable, serious look on his face. It brings the whole festive mood down. We are trying to seriously impress the new, wealthy neighbors this year, Arthur. I do not want Julian sitting there acting like a depressed martyr and entirely ruining the aesthetic of the evening. We will just easily lie to him and tell him we decided not to celebrate the holidays this year." Oliver immediately chimed in with a laughing emoji. "Thank God. He's so incredibly depressing to be around anyway. Good call, Mom." Arthur quickly concluded the sickening conversation. "Fine. It's decided. But I am absolutely sending him the enormous bill for Oliver's car the morning after. If he's not coming to dinner, he can at least make himself financially useful to this family from a distance." I stared blankly at the glowing screen. My own mother. She did not just accidentally forget to invite me. She did not lose my number. She actively, viciously campaigned to exclude me because my physical presence, the presence of the loyal son who paid her bills, who fixed their endless problems, who worked himself to the bone, ruined her shallow aesthetic. I was considered too cheap-looking for her high-society dinner party. I was too depressing for their perfectly curated, entirely fake lives. I gripped the hard edge of the marble counter until my knuckles turned stark white. The dull, lingering pain in my chest, the pathetic, lingering hope that maybe they were just thoughtless people making mistakes, evaporated instantly into thin air. It was violently replaced by a roaring, consuming, absolute inferno of pure, righteous rage. They viewed me as entirely subhuman, a servant, an ugly, unwanted accessory that was only briefly tolerated when it dispensed cash to solve their problems. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against the counter. The screen flashed bright. It was Arthur calling. I did not answer. I stood perfectly still and watched it ring, the sharp sound echoing loudly in the quiet, empty apartment. He called again. Then Eleanor called. Then Oliver's name flashed across the screen. The frantic notifications began piling up in a desperate, endless wave. I checked the clock on the wall. I knew exactly what was happening. It was 10:15 a.m. The bank's professional recovery team operated with ruthless, military efficiency. I unlocked my phone and finally opened the main family group thread. The frantic text messages were coming in so incredibly fast they blurred together on the screen. Oliver, "Julian, answer the damn phone right now. There are men in our driveway." Arthur, "Julian, what the hell did you just do? The bank is here. They are taking the Porsche. Answer your damn phone right this second." Eleanor, "Julian, please, answer us. Your father is having a massive panic attack in the living room. Tell these awful men to stop." Oliver, "They hooked the car up. They're dragging it down the street. You completely ruined my life. You bastard." I read every single panicked word. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel guilt. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a terrifying, euphoric sense of absolute control. I typed a single, perfectly precise reply into the chaotic group chat. The bank rightfully reclaimed their property because the borrower severely defaulted. I am not your bank. I am not your financial fixer, and I am definitely not ruining my personal aesthetic to pay for a drunk driver's criminal mistakes. I hit send. Then, without a second thought, I permanently blocked all of their numbers from my phone. I turned off the device entirely, walked straight into my bathroom, and turned on the shower. The scalding hot water washed over me, finally clearing away the very last remnants of the obedient, pathetic son I used to be. The storm had officially made landfall, and I was standing right at the absolute center of it, entirely unbothered. By noon, the freezing city was bustling loudly with frantic post-holiday traffic. I drove my modest, incredibly unassuming sedan through the snowy, gray streets of downtown Denver, blending in perfectly with the massive commuter rush. My phone sat completely silent in the passenger seat, firmly deactivated thanks to the absolute block I had placed on every member of my family. I knew with absolute certainty they were likely losing their collective minds, tearing their pristine suburban house apart in a frantic, screaming attempt to somehow regain their lost control over me. But I did not care. I had a massive company to run. I pulled smoothly into the highly secured, underground VIP parking garage of the towering glass and steel skyscraper located deep in the financial district. The armed security guard stationed at the gate, a burly ex-military man named Vance, immediately straightened his posture and offered a crisp salute as my license plate automatically scanned in the system. "Good morning, Mr. Rowan," Vance said respectfully through the heavy intercom system. "Morning, Vance," I replied smoothly, rolling up the window. I parked seamlessly in my reserved, private executive spot and took the secure, keycard-only private elevator directly to the top floor. When the polished steel doors slid open, I stepped immediately into the sprawling, ultra-modern headquarters of my cybersecurity firm. The massive panoramic windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the snow-capped Rocky Mountains. The steady, comforting hum of massive server racks and the quiet, focused chatter of brilliant software engineers filled the crisp air. This was my absolute domain. This was the massive empire I had built with my own two hands while my father was calling my teenage hobbies garbage. I walked briskly past a long row of glass-walled conference rooms and stepped directly into the corner office of my co-founder, Marcus. He was currently standing by his massive oak desk, aggressively reviewing a tall stack of complex legal documents regarding our recent buyout. Marcus knew absolutely everything about my family. He had been there in the dorms when I was eating instant noodles and crying from exhaustion in college, and he had watched me silently transfer thousands of dollars to my ungrateful parents over the agonizing years. He looked up immediately as I entered the room. "You look completely different today," he noted instantly, his incredibly sharp eyes analyzing my rigid posture. "The Porsche is gone," I said simply, taking a seat across from him, "and I permanently blocked all of their phone numbers." Marcus slowly lowered the legal documents onto his desk. A slow, highly predatory smile spread across his face. "Finally, it's about damn time. Did they actually send the repair invoice? $45,000. For a severe drunk driving accident that the insurance company completely refused to cover because he violated his policy. Oh, and my mother officially uninvited me to the family Christmas dinner because my clothes look entirely too cheap for her new neighbors. She said I ruin her aesthetic." Marcus scoffed loudly, violently shaking his head in total disbelief. The absolute staggering delusion of those people. "So what's the actual play here? Because I know you, Julian. You did not just block their numbers and call it a day. You have a plan." I stood up and walked over to the expansive glass window, looking straight down at the busy city streets far below us. Arthur's logistics firm. Their commercial lease on the 14th floor of this exact building is up for official renewal next week. Correct. Marcus quickly tapped his sleek keyboard, instantly bringing up the massive property management files. Correct. We completely absorbed the building's entire management portfolio when we bought the property out last quarter. They are fully expecting a standard 10-year renewal contract. They have absolutely no idea the building changed hands, let alone that you are the primary majority shareholder of the holding company. Draft an immediate, non-negotiable eviction notice. I ordered, my voice deadly steady. Refusal to renew the commercial lease. I want them entirely out of the 14th floor by the end of the month. No extensions. No negotiations. Marcus raised a single eyebrow, clearly incredibly impressed by the sheer tactical violence of the financial move. Julian Arthur will completely lose his mind. If his firm loses this prestigious headquarters, he instantly loses his premier corporate clients. It will completely destroy his professional reputation. He systematically destroyed my entire childhood. I think losing a fancy office space is an incredibly fair trade. I turned away from the freezing window, facing my partner. But they will not patiently wait for the formal eviction notice to arrive in the mail. Once they realize they absolutely cannot reach me by phone to scream at me, they will do what they always do when they want to violently bully me into total submission. They will come find me in person. Marcus frowned, crossing his arms. You think they will actually come here? To the corporate office? I absolutely guarantee it, I said with grim certainty. Arthur truly believes I am still just a pathetic, mid-level IT contractor renting a tiny desk in some shared workspace. He firmly thinks he can walk right in here, embarrass me loudly in front of my bosses, and physically force me to pay for Oliver's massive mess to save face. He uses public humiliation as a weapon to control me. I walked over to the desk and picked up the secure internal phone line. I directly dialed Security Chief Vance at the main lobby desk on the ground floor. Vance, this is Julian. Yes, sir. How can I assist you? Sometime this afternoon, an older man named Arthur Rowan, likely accompanied by a woman and a much younger man in his 20s, will inevitably attempt to enter the building. They will demand loudly to see me. They will likely be incredibly aggressive, hostile, and entitled. Understood, sir. Do you want my team to physically deny them entry at the front doors and escort them off the property? Vance asked, his tone shifting instantly into full tactical mode. No, I replied softly, staring directly at my reflection in the polished glass wall. Let them in. Let them come right up the elevator to the main lobby of our corporate floor. But assemble your entire security team. When they inevitably start screaming and making a massive scene, I want every single member of my executive board and every employee on the floor to see exactly who they are. Do not intervene or touch them until I give the absolute signal. Copy that, Mr. Rowan. We will be completely ready. I hung up the phone. Marcus was leaning heavily against his desk, arms tightly crossed. A look of profound, silent respect etched clearly on his face. You are walking them right into a massive, inescapable trap, Marcus said quietly. I am giving them exactly what they desperately want, I replied, carefully adjusting the expensive cuffs of my tailored suit. They want a captive audience. They want to show the entire world exactly how much power they have over me. I am simply providing the stage for their final performance. I walked out of Marcus's office and headed purposefully toward the main executive boardroom. We had a massive meeting scheduled with our primary investors, including Mr. Sterling, a billionaire venture capitalist who practically treated me like the son he never had. The timing was absolutely, devastatingly perfect. I sat calmly at the head of the massive mahogany conference table, organizing my quarterly financial reports. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking even a fraction of an inch. I felt an eerie, absolute calm wash over my entire body. The massive storm was currently raging through the city, tearing up the highway as my father furiously drove toward my office to exact his terrible vengeance. But he had absolutely no idea he was driving his fragile, paper-thin ego directly into an impenetrable billionaire fortress. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. 3:45 p.m. Any minute now. The tension inside the massive executive boardroom on the top floor of the tower was absolutely palpable, yet it was a highly productive, incredibly electric kind of energy. We were sitting around a breathtaking, custom-built mahogany conference table that stretched almost 20 feet across the expansive room. The floor-to-ceiling panoramic glass walls of the room offered a sprawling, unobstructed view of the snowy Denver skyline, the majestic Rocky Mountains looming quietly in the far distance under the crisp winter sun. At the far end of the heavy wooden table sat Mr. Sterling. He was our lead venture capitalist investor, an incredibly shrewd businessman whose personal net worth easily eclipsed the gross domestic product of several small island nations. Alongside him were three of our top-tier corporate lawyers wearing immaculate, $1,000 bespoke suits, our incredibly sharp chief financial officer, and Marcus, my brilliant co-founder and fiercely loyal best friend. We were deep into discussing the final, highly lucrative phases of our massive corporate buyout. We were actively talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in liquid assets, aggressive international expansion into European markets, and strategic commercial real estate acquisitions. It was, without a single doubt, the absolute pinnacle of my professional career. But while the brilliant minds around me were passionately debating the finer points of international tax law and corporate restructuring, my own mind was actively keeping a silent, precise, and highly anticipated countdown. At exactly 12 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, the heavy, frosted glass double doors of the main corporate lobby, located just outside our soundproofed boardroom, violently slammed open. Even through the incredibly thick, acoustically treated walls of the executive suite, I could instantly hear the immediate, chaotic commotion erupting outside. It started as a low, confused murmur of our highly trained receptionists trying to maintain professional order, and it rapidly escalated into a loud, incredibly obnoxious shouting match that echoed down the polished marble hallways. "I absolutely do not care about your damn corporate security protocols." A deeply familiar, sickeningly arrogant voice boomed across the lobby, loud enough to rattle the glass partitions. "I am looking for Julian Rowan. I am his father, and you are going to tell me exactly which pathetic little cubicle he is hiding in right now before I have your jobs." Marcus completely stopped his presentation mid-sentence. The laser pointer in his hand clicked off. He looked directly across the wide mahogany table at me, a highly predatory, knowing gleam instantly flashing in his dark eyes. Mr. Sterling frowned deeply, slowly adjusting his expensive, gold-rimmed reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was a man who demanded absolute perfection, and he was clearly annoyed by the sudden, highly unprofessional disruption occurring outside our highly secured doors. "Julian," Mr. Sterling said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded instant respect from everyone in the room. "Who on earth is screaming in our private lobby like a complete lunatic? Do we need to call the local authorities?" "That would unfortunately be my father, Mr. Sterling," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with the billionaire investor for a single second. "And presumably, judging by the secondary voices I hear, my mother and my younger brother have tagged along for the spectacle. They have aggressively come to demand that I personally pay my brother's incredibly expensive auto repair bills from a drunk driving incident. I sincerely apologize for the dramatic interruption to our agenda, but as we discussed briefly over dinner last week, this is a necessary personal housecleaning matter that requires my immediate attention." Mr. Sterling slowly leaned back in his plush, heavy leather chair, deliberately steepling his fingers together. He knew the entire toxic backstory. I had briefed him thoroughly on the massive financial liabilities and security risks my family posed. "Well," Sterling said, a cold, incredibly hard smile forming slowly on his weathered lips, "by all means let them come in. Let us see the exact kind of people who foolishly think they can aggressively storm into my building and make demands." I reached under the thick edge of the conference table and pressed the small, hidden intercom button connected directly to the security desk. "Vance, stand down your perimeter guards. Let them through the main checkpoint. Open the boardroom doors and let them step inside." A few agonizing seconds later, the massive, heavy double doors of our executive boardroom were violently pushed open. They were shoved so aggressively that the heavy metal handles hit the rubber wall stops with a loud, sharp crack that made one of the corporate lawyers physically jump in his seat. And there they stood, the Rowan family, completely unfiltered, in all their toxic, arrogant, and deeply delusional glory. Arthur aggressively led the charge into the room. His face was a deep, violently mottled shade of crimson red, a very clear medical sign of his dangerously skyrocketing blood pressure. He was wearing his standard, cheap, middle-management gray suit that looked incredibly out of place in the luxurious environment. He was aggressively pointing a thick, trembling finger directly in my direction. Right behind his shoulder was my mother, Eleanor. She was wearing a perfectly pressed, incredibly expensive designer winter coat that I had likely paid for a few years ago. Her manicured hands were tightly clutching her designer leather purse like a protective shield against her chest, and her face was already twisted into a flawless mask of highly manufactured, theatrical distress. And bringing up the rear was Oliver, the untouchable golden boy. He looked entirely disheveled, his eyes heavily bloodshot from a lack of sleep and intense panic. He was wearing an oversized, ridiculous designer hoodie that probably cost more than my first used car. He looked incredibly furious, but beneath the anger, he also looked like a terrified, trapped animal. They stormed blindly into the expansive room, completely and utterly ignoring the billionaire investor sitting at the head of the table, completely ignoring the elite corporate lawyers in their $1,000 suits, and entirely missing the sheer, intimidating, overwhelming wealth of the professional environment they had just aggressively breached. Arthur's angry tunnel vision was locked entirely and exclusively on me. He genuinely, firmly believed I was still just renting a cheap, temporary desk in a shared co-working space. He fully believed that the powerful, wealthy people sitting around this massive table were my strict, unforgiving corporate bosses. He was absolutely ready to use public humiliation, which had always been his favorite, most effective weapon, to violently force my total financial submission. "Julian!" Arthur roared at the top of his lungs, aggressively storming forward and slamming his heavy hand down violently onto the pristine mahogany table. The loud, aggressive smack echoed sharply in the large, silent room. "You ungrateful, pathetic excuse for a son. You stand up right now and explain yourself to your family." I did not stand up. I did not even flinch a single muscle. I sat perfectly still in my custom, ergonomic leather executive chair, leaning back slightly, my hands folded neatly and calmly in my lap. I looked up at his red, sweating face with absolute, freezing indifference. "Hello, Arthur. You are currently interrupting a very important, confidential financial meeting. I absolutely do not care about your pathetic little IT meeting," Arthur shouted, his spit literally flying across the polished wood of the table. "You called the bank. You actually had the unmitigated gall to call the damn bank and tell them to immediately repossess Oliver's car. Do you have any idea the massive, unbearable humiliation we just faced this morning? Our incredibly wealthy neighbors were watching from their windows. The loud tow truck dragged his beautiful white Porsche right down our pristine street for everyone to see. You embarrassed us." "It is most certainly not his Porsche," I corrected him calmly, my voice completely flat, completely devoid of any emotional reaction. "It is the bank's Porsche, because you both severely and entirely defaulted on the massive auto loan, and the insurance company completely denied the exorbitant repair claim. I simply performed my civic duty and informed the legal, rightful owners of the vehicle's current location so they could recover their stolen property. You were strictly supposed to pay that invoice," Oliver suddenly screamed, bravely stepping out from behind our father's shadow. His face was twisted in pure, unadulterated, entitled rage. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You make a decent, comfortable salary now. You always pay for my stuff when I need it. You knew I desperately needed that luxury car for my elite networking events. You completely ruined my entire life because you were throwing a pathetic, childish little tantrum over a stupid dinner invitation." Eleanor immediately stepped forward, placing a dramatically comforting, maternal hand flat on Oliver's chest, playing her designated role of the peacekeeper to absolute, sickening perfection. She looked directly at me, her eyes brimming with fake, highly calculated crocodile tears that she could summon on absolute command. "Julian, how could you possibly be so incredibly cruel and heartless to your own flesh and blood?" My mother whimpered loudly, her voice perfectly pitched to sound like a tragic, deeply wounded victim of elder abuse. "We have sacrificed absolutely everything we have to give you a good, stable life. Your father gave up his prime earning years for you. We paid for your food, we paid for your clothes when you were a boy. And the very moment your sweet brother makes one tiny, insignificant little mistake, you completely abandon him to the wolves? Over a simple, foolish misunderstanding about a Christmas invitation? You are completely breaking your poor mother's heart. A simple misunderstanding? I asked quietly, raising a single, highly skeptical eyebrow. Is that exactly what we are officially calling it now? Yes, it was a misunderstanding. Arthur barked loudly, aggressively glaring at the other powerful men sitting quietly in the room. He was clearly trying to dramatically drag my supposed bosses into the toxic family drama to get me immediately terminated. I demand to speak to your senior manager, whoever is in absolute charge of this corporate floor. This employee of yours sitting right here is a deeply unstable, incredibly selfish individual who completely abandons his own family in their darkest financial hour. I want him officially reprimanded. I want him fired. I will absolutely ruin his professional reputation in this entire city if you do not discipline him immediately. The sheer, staggering, unbelievable audacity of the aggressive threat hung heavily and awkwardly in the freezing air of the executive boardroom. Arthur stood there, his chest puffed out aggressively, breathing heavily through his nose, genuinely and truly believing he held the absolute, unchecked power to end my entire career with a few loud, aggressive words. He firmly thought the complete, stunned silence from the other wealthy men at the table was shock and horror at my terrible behavior as a son. He had absolutely no idea that the thick silence filling the room was actually profound, overwhelming, incredibly deep pity for his total, embarrassing ignorance. I slowly looked over at Marcus. Marcus simply smiled back at me. A terrifying, highly predatory, shark-like grin that completely exposed his teeth. I looked over at my lead corporate lawyer. He was calmly and quietly busy polishing his expensive glasses with a silk handkerchief, entirely unfazed by the screaming man in the cheap suit. Then, I looked slowly back up at my furious father. I deliberately let the heavy silence stretch for 5 long, agonizing, incredibly tense seconds. I wanted him to fully feel the absolute, intoxicating peak of his false power. I wanted him to savor the illusion of control right before I completely, utterly, and permanently destroyed it into dust. Are you quite finished throwing your tantrum, Arthur? I asked quietly, my voice slicing through the room. I am absolutely not finished until you pull out your phone, transfer exactly $45,000 directly into my bank account, and fix this massive, humiliating disaster you selfishly caused, Arthur aggressively demanded, violently slamming his closed fist on the table one more time for dramatic emphasis. You owe us. You owe us for your entire pathetic existence. The trap was now fully and completely sprung. They were standing exactly where I wanted them. The elaborate stage was perfectly set, the wealthy audience was actively watching, and the arrogant villains had confidently delivered their final, damning monologue. At the far end of the massive mahogany table, Mr. Sterling slowly and deliberately cleared his throat. The sound was incredibly soft, barely more than a low rumble, but it carried absolute, unquestionable, and terrifying authority. Arthur instantly snapped his head toward the older, gray-haired man, fully preparing to aggressively unleash another loud barrage of complaints and demands. But something deep in Mr. Sterling's icy, piercing, billionaire gaze made my furious father physically freeze dead in his tracks. The raw, unfiltered aura of extreme wealth and power radiating from Mr. Sterling was impossible to ignore. Mr. Sterling slowly stood up from his plush chair. He buttoned his bespoke, incredibly expensive suit jacket with slow, deliberate, highly calculated precision. Let me ensure I have this absolutely straight in my mind, Mr. Sterling said, his voice incredibly smooth but heavily laced with highly lethal intent. You violently storm past our heavily armed, highly trained private security detail in the lobby. You aggressively and violently interrupt a highly confidential, multi-million-dollar corporate merger meeting. And you aggressively demand to speak to the direct manager of this specific employee, so you can loudly demand he be fired from his position. Yes, Exactly. Arthur shot back aggressively, though his loud voice noticeably wavered slightly under the billionaire's intense, unblinking stare. He desperately needs to learn some basic respect. He needs to know his exact place in the hierarchy of this family. Mr. Sterling let out a short, incredibly cold, completely humorless laugh that sent a highly visible, terrifying shiver directly down Eleanor's spine. Mr. Rowan, you are currently standing in the highly secured executive boardroom of entirely private corporate property. And the man you are currently screaming at like a deranged lunatic is most certainly not an employee. Julian is the chief executive officer, the primary visionary founder, and the absolute majority shareholder of this entire global corporation. He is my equal business partner. He absolutely does not have a manager. He is the manager. He owns this room, he owns this company, and quite frankly, he could buy and sell your entire pathetic life before breakfast. Arthur's mouth completely dropped open, his jaw practically unhinged. The angry, deep crimson color instantly and violently drained from his red, sweating face, leaving him looking like a pale, completely deflated balloon. What? No, that is completely, statistically impossible. Julian is just a mid-level IT contractor. He works for a basic salary. He fixes computers. I have not worked for a basic salary in over 5 years, Arthur, I said firmly, finally standing up slowly from my executive chair. I calmly buttoned my own tailored suit jacket, actively projecting an overwhelming aura of total, unshakable, absolute control. I walked slowly and purposefully around the edge of the massive conference table until I was standing just a few short feet away from my completely stunned, entirely frozen family. Did you honestly, truly believe I would stay at the absolute bottom of the barrel forever? I asked, my voice echoing loudly and clearly in the silent, expansive room. While you were constantly busy worshipping Oliver's mediocrity and treating me like an overgrown, highly disposable bank account, I was actively building a massive empire. I built this global tech company completely from the ground up with my own 2 hands. I personally orchestrated this massive international merger. And, perhaps most incredibly interestingly for you, Arthur, I aggressively invested my massive corporate profits into securing prime, highly coveted commercial real estate across the city. I casually reached into my inner suit jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a crisp, heavy, legally binding document. It was securely sealed in a premium, heavy-stock corporate folder. I tossed it effortlessly onto the polished table directly in front of my father. It slid smoothly across the polished wood and stopped right at his trembling fingertips. What exactly is this? Arthur asked, his voice suddenly trembling violently. His arrogant, loud bravado was rapidly and completely crumbling into sheer, unadulterated panic. That is a formal, legally binding, entirely non-negotiable eviction notice, I stated coldly, my eyes locked onto his terrified face. You see, Arthur, exactly 3 months ago, my private real estate trust quietly and aggressively purchased this entire 30-story glass tower. The very same premium tower where your prestigious, highly respected logistics firm currently rents its entire corporate headquarters on the 14th floor. You are currently standing inside my personal building. I am your commercial landlord, and I have officially, legally decided to completely terminate your commercial lease agreement. You and your entire failing firm have exactly 14 days to completely vacate my private property before my armed security team physically throws your desks and computers out onto the dirty street. The incredibly heavy silence that followed that statement was absolute. It was the exact kind of deafening, terrifying silence that happens immediately after a massive bomb violently detonates. Arthur stared down at the crisp eviction notice as if it were a highly venomous, coiled snake ready to strike. His hands began to shake completely uncontrollably. He knew exactly, precisely what this devastating document meant. If his mid-level logistics firm suddenly lost their premier, highly coveted downtown headquarters, they would instantly lose their most vital, high-paying corporate clients who demanded prestige. The massive logistical and financial nightmare of moving an entire corporate company in exactly 2 weeks would completely and utterly bankrupt his fragile, highly leveraged business. Eleanor let out a sharp, highly genuine gasp of pure horror. Her knees visibly buckled. She completely dropped her expensive designer purse onto the floor, the heavy leather slapping loudly against the hardwood. Julian, please, you absolutely cannot do this to us. He will completely lose his entire business. He will lose absolutely everything we have worked for. We are your family. Family? I repeated the word slowly, pronouncing it as if it tasted like highly toxic poison on my tongue. Is that what we officially are? A family? I pulled my personal cell phone from my pocket and quickly unlocked the screen. I opened the highly encrypted, secure file my private investigator had successfully sent me earlier that morning. I held the incredibly bright screen up high so Oliver, Eleanor, and Arthur could see it perfectly clearly. It was the massive, highly detailed, official police report, complete with the damning breathalyzer results and the horrifying, high-resolution photographs of the completely destroyed white Porsche. Oliver physically recoiled in pure terror, stepping rapidly backward until his back hit the cold glass wall of the boardroom. His face turned a sickly, nauseating shade of chalk white. $45,000, I said, my voice rising significantly in volume, completely filling the large room with my righteous, long overdue, explosive fury. You aggressively and violently demanded that I pay exactly $45,000 to fix a luxury car that Oliver violently crashed head-on into a concrete wall while he was driving completely blackout drunk. You actively lied to the financing bank. You committed massive, highly illegal insurance fraud by desperately trying to hide the severe DUI charge. You hired an incredibly expensive defense lawyer to illegally suppress the criminal charges. And then you had the absolute, staggering, unbelievable audacity to try and pass the massive financial burden entirely onto me. Julian, keep your damn voice down, Arthur hissed desperately, looking around in total panic, terrified that the wealthy billionaire investors in the room were hearing every single word of his family's dark, highly illegal criminal secrets. I will absolutely not be quiet, I snapped loudly, taking a highly aggressive step forward, completely backing my terrified father down. I have been completely quiet for 32 miserable years. I was incredibly quiet when you looked at my hard work and called my passions garbage. I was quiet when you aggressively manipulated me into paying for your new roof, while Aunt Clara secretly spied on my corporate salary. I was quiet when you entirely drained my college fund to give to your absolutely useless golden boy. But I am entirely done being quiet. I quickly swiped the screen on my phone, bringing up the second, even more devastating piece of evidence. It was the clear screenshots from the secret, highly exclusive family group chat. The cruel messages sent directly by my own mother. And you, Eleanor? I said, slowly turning my piercing, freezing gaze to the woman who gave birth to me. She was visibly and violently trembling, hot tears of genuine, absolute terror streaming rapidly down her heavily made-up face. You stood there exactly 2 minutes ago and dramatically cried about a simple, innocent misunderstanding regarding our Christmas dinner. Tell me the truth, mother. Does my cheap, department store clothing still completely ruin your aesthetic? Am I still entirely too depressing to be seen around your wealthy, snobby neighbors? I began to read her exact, cruel text messages aloud, my voice dripping heavily with pure, unadulterated, highly acidic contempt. Let's just deliberately and intentionally leave him off the invite list this year. Honestly, he always comes dressed in those cheap, incredibly plain clothes. I do absolutely not want Julian sitting there at my table acting like a depressed martyr and entirely ruining the beautiful aesthetic of the evening. We will just easily lie to him. I stopped reading the message and looked dead directly into her terrified eyes. Eleanor quickly covered her mouth with her violently trembling hands, violently sobbing into her palms. Her perfect, highly manicured, completely fake suburban facade was completely, irreversibly, and publicly shattered into a million tiny pieces. You did not accidentally forget me? I whispered loudly, the cold, undeniable truth slicing cleanly through the room. "You actively erased me." And Arthur eagerly followed it up by proudly typing, "I am sending him the massive bill. If he's not coming to dinner, he can at least make himself financially useful." That is exactly what I am to you people. A wallet, a mindless servant, a pathetic, useful loser you only barely tolerate when you desperately need cash to fund your fake lifestyle. I took a slow step back, calmly adjusting the lapels of my suit, fully regaining my perfect, icy, highly professional composure. I looked at the three of them standing there completely ruined. My father, a broken, terrified, entirely exposed middle manager. My mother, a deeply manipulative, officially exposed liar. And my brother, a cowardly, highly criminal child who was about to face the real world. "I am officially and permanently done being used," I declared with absolute finality. "The bank already has the Porsche. The formal eviction notice is officially served. If any of you ever attempt to contact me again, I will personally and happily hand this massive police report detailing Oliver's severe DUI and your massive insurance fraud directly to the district attorney's office. My elite corporate lawyers will completely bury your entire family in so much aggressive litigation you will be heavily paying legal fees until the very day you die." I turned sharply to the main boardroom door and nodded firmly. Security Chief Vance, who had been standing silently in the hallway with 4 massive, heavily armed security guards, immediately stepped into the room. "Mr. Vance," I said incredibly smoothly, "these 3 individuals are currently trespassing on highly secure, private corporate property. Please physically escort them out of my building immediately. If they resist even slightly, call the police and have them officially and publicly arrested for criminal trespassing." "With absolute pleasure, Mr. Rowan," Vance growled deeply. He grabbed Arthur firmly and aggressively by the shoulder. They did not even attempt to fight back. They were completely, utterly, and totally broken. Arthur looked down at the eviction notice lying on the table one last agonizing time, his eyes completely hollow and dead. Eleanor tried weakly to reach out to me, desperately whispering my name, but a massive security guard smoothly and firmly blocked her physical path. Oliver kept his head pointed straight down at the floor, openly and loudly weeping like a terrified child as he was forcefully marched out of the majestic boardroom. The heavy glass doors swung entirely shut behind them. The room was perfectly, beautifully silent once again. I took a massive, deep breath, letting the stale, incredibly toxic air of my miserable past fully and completely leave my lungs. I slowly turned back to the massive mahogany table. Marcus was grinning from ear to ear, clearly highly satisfied. Mr. Sterling slowly raised his expensive coffee cup toward me in a silent, deeply respectful, highly approving salute. "Now," I said smoothly, pulling my heavy chair back and sitting down comfortably at the head of the table. "Where exactly were we regarding the aggressive international expansion strategy? The absolute fallout from that explosive, highly dramatic afternoon in the corporate boardroom was absolute, utterly devastating, and incredibly swift. I did not have to lift another single finger against them. The harsh, highly unforgiving reality of the real world they had tried to manipulate finally did all the heavy lifting for me. Exactly 14 days later, precisely as the legal document stated, Arthur's supposedly prestigious logistics firm was formally, legally, and highly publicly evicted from the 14th floor of my premium building. Because he had completely and foolishly tied his entire professional identity and corporate ego to that specific high-end downtown location, the sudden, highly embarrassing forced relocation to a cheap, run-down, incredibly depressing industrial park in the far suburbs sent absolute shockwaves of panic through his entire client base. Vicious rumors wildly and rapidly circulated throughout the industry that the firm was completely financially insolvent. Within 2 remarkably short months, his 3 absolutely biggest, most lucrative corporate accounts fully severed their massive contracts, citing extreme instability. Arthur, a deeply arrogant man who had aggressively built his entire pathetic, fragile ego on the absolute illusion of total control, was completely backed into a corner and forced to file for massive corporate bankruptcy. He lost his small, highly guarded inheritance, He completely lost his failing business, and he entirely lost his precious, carefully manicured reputation in the wealthy community. But the absolute worst, most devastating punishment was rightfully reserved for the untouchable golden child, Oliver. Without my massive, highly secret financial safety net to constantly and quietly bail him out of trouble, the harsh legal consequences of his incredibly reckless actions finally caught up to him with a vengeance. The luxury auto financing bank aggressively and successfully sued him in civil court for the massive remaining financial balance on the completely destroyed Porsche. Because the insurance company had formally and legally logged the severe DUI violation on his permanent record, Oliver was heavily and aggressively investigated by the local authorities. He could absolutely not afford a slick, high-priced defense lawyer this time around. Without Arthur's money to protect him, he was formally and publicly convicted of a severe criminal misdemeanor for driving heavily under the influence. His driver's license was completely and entirely suspended for 2 full years, and the judge heavily mandated him to complete hundreds of grueling hours of highly visible community service. The deeply entitled golden boy was finally forced to put on a bright orange safety vest and physically pick up disgusting garbage on the side of the freezing public highway while cars drove past. Then, exactly as I predicted, came the desperate, incredibly pathetic attempts to somehow crawl back into my good graces and access my vast wealth. Aunt Clara, the notorious family spy who had always ruthlessly reported my minor salary increases to my parents so they could demand money, had the absolute staggering audacity to call my highly private executive office line. She somehow bypassed my security protocols by frantically claiming to the receptionist that it was a massive, life-or-death family emergency. When I finally picked up the phone, she immediately launched into a sickeningly sweet, highly rehearsed emotional monologue. She sobbed loudly and told me all about her incredibly messy, highly expensive divorce, how she was struggling to survive, how she had always secretly been my absolute biggest supporter in the family, and how she desperately needed a small, insignificant $50,000 business investment to start a new company and get back on her feet. I did not yell at her. I did not get angry. I simply laughed, a highly cold, completely hollow sound that echoed in my office, and said, "Aunt Clara, the Julian Rowan Bank is permanently and forever closed for business. I highly suggest you ask Arthur for the investment money. Oh wait, I forgot. He is entirely bankrupt." I hung up the phone instantly and immediately had my top telecom engineers permanently block her number and completely ban her from accessing the entire corporate server. The final, truly pathetic confrontation happened exactly 6 months after the massive corporate buyout was fully finalized and announced to the public. I was casually walking out of an incredibly exclusive, highly publicized, high-end charity gala in downtown Denver. The local paparazzi were lightly flashing their bright cameras as I walked calmly toward my waiting, heavily armored private car. Suddenly, a frail, completely unrecognizable, frantic woman aggressively pushed past the heavy velvet security ropes. It was Eleanor, my own mother. She looked absolutely terrifyingly terrible. Her expansive closet of expensive designer coats was completely gone, fully replaced by a cheap, highly worn-out, incredibly thin sweater. The deep, agonizing stress of Arthur's massive, highly public bankruptcy, combined with Oliver's highly public, deeply humiliating legal troubles, had violently and visibly aged her an entire decade. "Julian!" she cried out loudly, her voice completely cracking with genuine, highly desperate panic as she rushed toward me. "Julian, please, you absolutely have to stop and talk to me right now." My massive, highly trained private security detail immediately stepped forward in unison to aggressively intercept her, physically blocking her path, but I raised a single, calm hand, silently signaling them to pause and step back. I stood completely still on the cold, wet concrete sidewalk, the bright city lights reflecting beautifully in the puddles, and looked entirely down at the broken woman who had intentionally, cruelly erased me from her family dinner table. "What exactly do you want, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice completely, utterly devoid of any warmth, pity, or familial affection whatsoever. She reached out desperately, trying frantically to grab the incredibly expensive, tailored fabric of my tuxedo sleeve, but I took a highly deliberate, calculated step backward, ensuring I kept a firm, highly secure physical boundary directly between us. "Please!" she aggressively and loudly sobbed, thick, messy tears streaming rapidly down her deeply lined, exhausted face. "We are entirely losing the suburban house. The bank is heavily foreclosing on the property next week. Your father is completely and utterly depressed. He will not even physically get out of bed anymore. And Oliver absolutely cannot find a decent job anywhere with his highly public criminal record. You have hundreds of millions of dollars, Julian. You are literally on the cover of financial magazines. A tiny, completely insignificant fraction of your massive wealth could completely and entirely save our family from total ruin. Please, I am begging you directly as your own mother. I am so deeply, incredibly sorry for what happened at Christmas. It was a terrible, horrible mistake." I looked deeply at her, actively searching my own heart for even a single tiny ounce of pity, a single lingering shred of the desperate, pathetic little boy who used to build broken computers in the freezing garage just to try and win her highly fleeting, totally conditional approval. But there was absolutely, entirely nothing there. The emotional bank vault was completely, permanently empty. "It was absolutely not a mistake, Eleanor," I said, my voice incredibly calm, completely cutting through the cold night air like a highly sharpened surgical scalpel. "A mistake is accidentally dropping a glass of water. You meticulously, highly intentionally orchestrated my complete, humiliating exclusion because my cheap clothes ruined your pathetic, shallow aesthetic. You actively laughed and fully agreed when Arthur arrogantly decided to send me a massive $45,000 bill for a wrecked car I never even drove. You did absolutely not love me then, and you absolutely do not love me now. You only desperately love my massive bank account." "No, that is absolutely not true," she wailed loudly, completely dropping to her knees right there on the dirty, freezing city sidewalk, entirely causing the nearby paparazzi to snap hundreds of highly lucrative photos wildly. "You permanently and happily crossed out my name from the dinner guest list," I said, looking straight down at her pathetic, sobbing form without a shred of emotion. "I simply and highly respectfully respected your bold decision and left the family table forever. You completely chose Oliver as your ultimate, long-term investment. Now, you finally get to live with the exact, devastating financial returns of that terrible, highly flawed portfolio. Do not ever, under any circumstances, approach me in public again." I turned my back completely on her, got smoothly into the warm, highly luxurious, incredibly quiet interior of my private car, and firmly instructed the professional driver to leave immediately. I did not look back out the tinted window even once. I left her precisely where she truly belonged, entirely trapped in the cold, harsh, highly unforgiving reality of her own terrible, incredibly toxic choices. A full, highly transformative year has passed since that freezing, incredibly chaotic Christmas Eve that completely altered the trajectory of my entire existence. I am currently standing quietly on the massive, completely wraparound glass balcony of my highly secure private penthouse suite. The sprawling, incredibly vibrant city of Denver stretches out endlessly and beautifully beneath me, resembling a beautiful, vast sea of glittering lights and endless, highly lucrative possibilities. The incredibly cold mountain wind gently and smoothly brushes against my face, but I absolutely do not feel the biting, painful chill anymore. I only feel a profound, incredibly deep, totally overwhelming sense of absolute, unbreakable peace. Inside my massive, highly decorated living room, Marcus is loudly and happily pouring 2 large glasses of incredibly expensive, 20-year-old aged scotch. We are formally, highly enthusiastically celebrating the incredibly successful 1-year anniversary of our massive corporate merger, and the incredibly successful, highly profitable global launch of our newest, cutting-edge cybersecurity initiative. My completely new life is entirely filled with brilliant, highly supportive colleagues, completely genuine, deeply loyal friendships, and a massive, incredibly secure fortune that fully ensures I will never, ever have to actively worry about surviving another single day in poverty or completely forced servitude. But true, absolute wealth, I have profoundly and deeply realized over this past year, has absolutely entirely nothing to do with the massive, incredibly large numbers sitting comfortably in my highly diversified investment portfolios, or the stack of prime commercial real estate deeds securely locked away in my heavy, fireproof vault. True, absolute wealth is the profound, incredibly quiet, totally unshakable peace of mind that completely washes over your entire soul when you finally, permanently stop breaking your own back trying to actively and desperately carry the heavy, incredibly toxic burdens of deeply broken people who completely refuse to walk on their own 2 feet. For over 30 agonizing, incredibly painful years, I firmly and completely believed that my core, fundamental value as a human being was entirely and completely tied to my absolute financial utility. I truly, deeply thought that if I just paid enough incredibly expensive bills, if I somehow fixed enough massive, entirely avoidable disasters, if I quietly absorbed enough highly toxic emotional abuse, my family would eventually wake up and miraculously, genuinely love me. I thought the massive, highly painful, aching distance completely wedged between us was somehow entirely my personal failure, a deep, highly fundamental flaw in my own design as a son. I was so incredibly, profoundly wrong. Some deeply broken, highly toxic people do not actually want a loving son, or a supportive brother, or a genuine, caring friend. They strictly and entirely want a silent emotional sponge and an incredibly endless, highly compliant ATM machine. They desperately want someone to aggressively and constantly dump their heavy, highly toxic waste onto so they can keep their own incredibly shallow, highly fake lives looking perfectly clean and aesthetically pleasing to the outside world. When I finally picked up that phone, fully called the bank, and aggressively ordered the brutal, highly public repossession of that pristine white Porsche, I did not just legally and permanently cut off the massive financial bleeding. I aggressively, permanently, and violently severed the heavy, highly invisible emotional chains that had kept me completely bound to their deeply manipulative, highly destructive games for decades. I completely stopped desperately seeking their highly conditional permission to simply exist in the world. I entirely stopped waiting for a fake, highly reluctant invitation to a family dinner table where I was never, ever truly, genuinely welcome in the first place. I entirely built my own massive, incredibly successful table, and I only aggressively invite people who actively respect my highly capable mind, completely honor my strict, unbreakable boundaries, and highly value my genuine, unfiltered presence. I took a slow, highly satisfying sip of the incredibly expensive scotch, completely letting the warm, rich, incredibly complex liquid burn slightly and smoothly down my throat. I looked out entirely at the massive, glowing city, feeling incredibly light, entirely open, and completely, absolutely free. People constantly and mistakenly think the absolute, incredibly hardest part of actively dealing with a deeply toxic, highly abusive family is the painful, incredibly agonizing act of letting go. They think it is the highly dramatic, incredibly loud screaming matches or the cold, completely freezing silence. It absolutely isn't. The incredibly hardest part is the terrifying, highly earth-shattering realization of exactly how long you desperately, completely held on to a massive, totally crushing weight that absolutely never, ever belonged to you in the first place. And in that beautiful, incredibly profound, highly life-altering realization, something fundamental, incredibly deep inside your entire soul permanently, irreversibly shifts. The quiet, highly peaceful silence of your apartment completely stops feeling like a painful, highly isolating absence. It completely and beautifully starts sounding exactly like absolute, glorious, entirely unapologetic freedom. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you so incredibly, profoundly much for staying completely with me this far on this highly emotional journey. You're truly, absolutely amazing, and your valuable time completely means the entire world to me. Please highly help me by actively liking this video and completely commenting the number 1 directly below so I absolutely know you've been right here completely with me until this exact, highly important point. This massive, incredibly generous support not only highly helps more people actively discover this incredibly important story, but also completely lets me know that my highly painful experiences genuinely, completely mean something to someone out there who might be silently, actively struggling with their own highly toxic family dynamics. Your incredible, absolutely generous support is the absolute, entirely greatest motivation for me to actively keep sharing the rest of this highly amazing, deeply personal journey of incredible healing and aggressive boundary setting. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own highly toxic, completely manipulative family? Have you ever been entirely used as the reliable financial fixer or the quiet emotional scapegoat, only to be completely and violently abandoned when you actually needed them the most? Please share your highly personal story directly in the comments completely below. You are absolutely entirely not alone in this highly difficult fight, and actively establishing firm, completely unbreakable boundaries is the absolute, highly critical first massive step toward your own complete, entirely total freedom. And absolutely don't forget to boldly, highly aggressively hit that subscribe button so you absolutely, completely do not miss the next incredible, highly emotional journey. Stay incredibly strong, completely protect your peace, and absolutely never let anyone completely make you feel like you are just a highly disposable option.